Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of 3F, Faith, Family, and Freedom. I'm Bobby Allison.
I'm Mateo.
I'm the psychologist, and he's the theologian. Today, we're going to talk about debunking white supremacy. That's essentially the title of our episode today. We've noticed a lot on our culture of late, probably the last 10 years, to be sure, that there's this push for intersectionality and emphasis on woke culture, gender identity, racial identity, over the natural course of things, over to push out the natural course of how our country has progressed through the years. There's more of an emphasis in calling out the white culture, the dominant culture, the systemic racism that they're trying to push now, and we want to try our best to debunk that today. So we'll get into that and a couple of other topics. I'm sure we'll try to bounce around a few things. We have some quotes. We have some stories that we'll emphasize. So let's get to it.
3F is a psychologist and theologian providing a much-needed commentary on the three most essential elements of life: faith, family, and freedom.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. Debunking white supremacy. So let's just get right into it. Let's try to do our best to define what at least they think white supremacy is. I mean, can you think of a good synopsis of what the far left or these powers that be, which includes everybody, it includes universities, churches, have this, there's a lot of woke churches nowadays. So what would be a good synopsis or summary of what they feel white supremacy is from your standpoint?
Yeah, I think when you say what they think white supremacy is, it makes me immediately realize we need to stress that we're debunking woke white supremacy, because there is real, there is real white supremacy out there.
It exists. We know this.
Yes, whether it's the KKK or the Aryan Brotherhood or what have you. And we're certainly not debunking that white supremacy, but we're debunking the liberal idea of what they call white supremacy these days, which is not true white supremacy, and therefore blurs the whole issue.
If you really want to understand white supremacy, go to prison. I don't know why, but whenever you go to prison, you're immediately separated into racial groups. And then you have your Aryan group. And if you're a white guy in prison and you're not in the Aryan group, you're in trouble. So that's a good, that might be a microcosm type example of how human nature typically kind of formulates these situations. But when you get into a prison, you immediately see who the Aryan people are, who the African, then the Latino gang related sections that MS-13, whatever it might be, but they separate immediately into those factions. But the greater culture, the KKK, the Aryan Brotherhood that exists outside of prison.
Now, are you telling us this from personal experience or from watching 60 Days In?
I've been in prison a lot in my life. I'm a forensic psychologist, so I have an excuse for that. But I've been to lots of prisons.
That's right.
Jails.
You do go to the prisons as a psychologist.
It's a fun place to be as long as they let you out at the end of the day, which is typically my case. I've never been kept in there.
You know, it's interesting though, because in prison, that divide that takes place, it's a violent atmosphere, or certainly can be violent, and so it's a survival thing. So that the lines aren't blurred, and for survival, everyone just sticks to obvious groups. But if this woke white supremacy, this idea, this intersectionality that's trying to divide us and separate us as races, if this is successful, it is actually going to create an environment like that potentially in the real world, where they have made such a divide and made such a war of this that people start becoming tribalized by race and not just by politics. And those of us who don't buy into this, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, we have to work extra hard to to keep our bonds and show our brotherhood when the rest of society is telling us that we can't coexist in harmony and that there are divides against us. The long game and the end game, it's going to make society like a prison to where everyone just blacks are supposed to hate whites. Whites are supposed to hate blacks. Mexican and Asians, choose your corners. But that's the long game. And that's why this has to be taken seriously and shown for what it is, that it is not this, it's not altruistic in the end. It's divisive, and it's taking us back and not forward.
Right. Human beings are extremely complicated creatures. We are created in the image of God, so we've got some clear teachings and a clear path to try to navigate. But outside of that, we're still extremely complex. I mean, God did an amazing job on just the nuance and the diversity within each individual that produces beauty and produces horrific things. But one of the things that we do typically is we typically will make quick judgments on our environment, on the people that we're around, on the people that we associate with. We make quick assessments on whether or not we think this person is approachable, whether we're attracted to this person or not. So there's lots of different ways that discrimination in maybe a good way happens. But then there's also the negative side of discrimination, which I think is overemphasized now in our culture as something evil and something to be vilified, when it's actually kind of a natural progression of the way we are as human beings. Case in point, a prison setting. It's a perfect microcosm, perfect test case. Why don't people in prison perpetuate a socialistic framework? Why don't they get in there and try to transcribe what Marx wanted us to do? That seems to be popular amongst the far left right now. Hey, let's try socialism. So why don't they do that in prison? Why doesn't somebody stand up and say, hey, let's centralize everything and then divvy out responsibilities and prestige and all that stuff, as it comes. But no, they immediately delve into baser instincts, carnal or primal instincts to separate each other and survive in a framework where that's very can be very dangerous.
And you bring up Karl Marx, and I think that's an important part of this discussion, is to recognize the Marxism that lies behind this racial divide, this push for racial division. And what you need to know is that Marxism in its original form in I was going to say Germany, but I guess he also went to England. But just Marxism in its original form was all about class divide, the bourgeois and the proletariats. And it presented that there could absolutely be no harmony between the two, that until bourgeois society was completely overthrown, that the proletariats would always be at the bottom, and there had to be a complete destruction of society for the state to get where it needs to be, and that it could not happen without this destruction. So if you read the Communist Manifesto, it's all about endorsing this divide and getting people to see the world through the lens of this divide in order for there to be a revolutionary overthrow. Marx believed without that overthrow, things could not get to the point they needed to get to. Well, today, it's harder to perpetuate that class divide because people, especially in America, that's doing well for a lot of people and for most people, in a place where you can come with nothing and rise to the top, it's hard to get people to buy into the idea that this is something that just has to be absolutely destroyed. So what they're doing is they're going into race, and instead of it being the
race, ethnicity, gender.
Instead of it being the business owners or those doing well in capitalism divided against those who aren't doing well, because there's more of a blend of it all, it says, well, let's separate races, gender identities, and use that as the divide that can't be overcome and tear people apart.
Yeah, that's the definition of intersectionality. you can define clear intersections between races, between genders, the different identities, sexuality. So it's a way that they're basically shifting the wedge or re-identifying where the wedge is going to be to try to infiltrate the system that's dominant right now. And also at the same time, they're identifying the dominant situation as this white supremacist or institutionally racist system. And then emphasizing that those intersectional qualities as the solution. So it's essentially Marxist in its founding, and it's the roots are Marxist. It's pretty much all Marxism. It's a jump towards socialism.
And the idea, the Marxist sentiment behind it is that the only way to get things where they need to be or to get better is through a revolution. There's no evolution. There's no positive steps. It takes overthrow and revolution. So that's why they're trying to present this divide. I know it encompasses gender and other things like you say, but to really just keep it clean and how we're looking at the racial divide of Black America and white America, they present it that there has to be a revolution. The whole system has to be torn down and rebuilt, and there's no getting better without that. Well, to create a revolution, you have to put each other at each other's throats and create hate and animosity. And whoever you have labeled the oppressors, which right now the move is that all white people are an oppressive class just by nature, that must be entirely overthrown and thrown down for there to be any solution.
Right. So right now you could maybe consider the fact that we're in a cold civil or a cold revolution right now, because you can see the precursors. I mean, you can see the people taking their masks off. The media is largely propping a lot of people up that have these various messages. You're seeing more aggression towards a kinetic revolution, which will be their end goal, the end result. I mean, who knows how it ends up? Who knows who's the victor? But it seems like we're heading down that path. Case in point, a couple of stories that we have to present today. There's a story that came out of Fox News this week about a Duquesne seminary professor who's essentially making an argument that it would be an ethical decision for a white person to commit suicide or to kill themselves because of this white supremacist culture, because of the fact that white people have kept other intersectional masses down throughout the last few hundred years or so. So they're saying that because of that atrocity or because of that that bad thing, that white people should overcorrect and therefore kill themselves to make amends for the oppression that they've perpetrated on these intersectional populations. There's nothing that could be further from the Bible or more anti-God or anti-Christ than that. It totally precludes the individual's ability to be redeemed, to ask the Lord for forgiveness, to do better, to turn around one's behaviors and thinking. It totally takes the power from the individual away from making changes in one's life, making changes in one's culture.
This would be horrific for any human being to say, let alone professor, that anyone should kill themselves. But for a seminary professor to stand up there in that role and to say that anyone for any reason should kill themselves, should take their own life, take their own life, and you call yourself a seminary professor, I don't know this this person. I hadn't heard the story till you told me, but I think this person should be stripped of that role and that title, because there's nothing more anti-Christ, anti-Bible, anti-God than to tell any human being that they should kill themselves for any reason. That is disgusting. And the fact that a professor can feel emboldened enough to say that and can feel safe to say something like that tells you how far our society has come and how sick this has gotten and how much of the enemy has infiltrated this, that can even be slightly plausible as something you can say. I mean, as a psychologist, you could answer this better than myself, but I think there's a lot of people nowadays that are suicidal for whatever reason. And it doesn't take a lot of prompting and pushing, I would imagine, to push that overboard. So isn't that such a dangerous thing to say that almost just puts blood on your hands, if you will, to even throw that out there?
Well, yes, but on many different levels. So on the level of just being a seminary professor to iterate something like that is horrifying on that level. But then you take the macrocosm or the microcosm type or 30,000 foot view. Suicide is a huge problem in this country. It's become exacerbated by the pandemic that we've been through. I can't tell you how many young people I've seen that just want to talk to somebody, have felt suicidal, have attempted suicide, that don't need much prompting, don't need much nudging. And on top of the fact that a lot of these kids are young white kids that are being indoctrinated and taught in schools that they've oppressed minority populations for hundreds of years and should now kill themselves because of that. So you're already indoctrinating our kids to feel guilty, to feel this white guilt, as Shelby Steele calls it. But then on top of that, you're then making it okay if they just go ahead and kill themselves, because why don't you just go do that to make amends? That would be ethical, right? That's essentially what this professor is saying. So that's the second more heinous level, that he's actually advocating for probably people that he loves, people within his own orbit, to commit suicide. I mean, how heinous is that? I don't think it gets more blasphemous or heinous than that.
And it's people within this sick, woke game that's been created trying to virtue signal and show that they're the least racist of anyone by what they can say. It's like a challenge to prove that, I can hate myself more than you, or I can hate this group. I can admit that I'm so much more terrible than you. And people are trying to prove how terrible they are. But as I said in the beginning, Christians, conservatives, those of us on the side of right, black, white, Asian, Mexican, we've got to stick together and keep harmony. And that's the most important thing. So what I say now is just to highlight the idiocy of the argument. When you say that all white people are oppressive and oppressors because of what happened in the past or by nature. So in school, you have them step forward and admit that they're an oppressor and admit these things. Well, if we're going to play that game, and if we're going to play it fully and right and in a true way and not just through platitudes of wokeism, then we really need to dig into the genealogy and history, go back to Africa and find out what African tribes were dominating and killing other groups. In more modern history, we've got the Tutsis, and the Hutus, which black people were selling other people into slavery. So we can at least get the people with that ancestry to admit that they're oppressive people as well. So we get all the oppressors together.
That's why this is a power push, because they're not going to consider all of history. They're not going to consider all of history that stuff occurred, that some of the first slaveholders, some of the first slave pushers and slaveholders were of minority descent. they're not going to, or the fact that that slavery has been around for, it's perhaps the oldest trade that exists beyond maybe prostitution and seminary clergy. The oldest. It's probably the oldest trade scenario alongside those other two.
And I want to be clear that I'm not making the point that white people aren't culpable or black people are equally culpable. The point I'm trying to make is we're all individuals, and no single race has the monopoly on oppression and oppression. It's individuals. There's good white people and bad white people, good black people, bad black people. And when you try to just broad brush an entire race, you step away from the truth and you get into fallacy and ideology.
Yeah. And also, slavery is bad. It's a horrible stain, horrible decision that existed at our founding, and it's a horrible process that happened. Racism is bad. We want to make those things clear, but these are things we have to deal with as a culture. It happened. We can't erase it, and we don't believe it's something to throw the baby out with the bathwater because of. We have to move on. We have to relentlessly strive for the greatness that we always have in this country. It's gotten better gradually. You look around today; we're more diverse and more equal and egalitarian in our approach to pretty much every sphere of our culture and of our commerce and economy and all that stuff. It's never been. It doesn't appear to me that. I could be wrong. But I think statistics back it up too, that we're pretty darn close to being, 100% better, 180 degrees better than we were 200 years ago in the midst of slavery.
Yeah, there's still a ways to go on different things.
Steven
and
Pinker,
ways
Enlightenment
to
Now.
improve.
Yeah.
It's not that we've totally reached as good as we're going to get. There are still.
We got to keep trying too.
There are still white people in there that don't like when black people move into their neighborhood. That's disgusting and horrible. There's still a ways to go, but it's gotten so much better and it's continuing to get better. But when you throw in this woke divisiveness, it's going to kill the progress and take us back. And that's why we're pushing back on this and why you need to push back on this. We are going to be accused of being white supremacists for even pushing back on this and the arguments that we're making, and that it's our oppressive white nature that does that. But we are pushing back on this because it's going to destroy everything America and the world goes as America goes. And when that's destroyed, it's going to be destroyed for all races. So we're not fighting to keep white people where they are. We're fighting for white people and black people within this country. And in fact, black conservatives, my brothers and sisters, are hated just as much by these people when they stand for these ideals and are accused of being racist themselves. What were you saying happened with Candace Owens? Who, if you don't know her, she's a black conservative that in conservative circles is well known. But what happened with her?
Yeah, there's a story that came out today. I don't know if it's confirmed or anything, but apparently Candace Owens was about to get a vaccine, become vaccinated. She had an appointment, but apparently the lab found out her identity, who she was as a conservative, and canceled her appointment or canceled the entire vaccine for her. Just another example of the way this is being perpetrated. It's not just race, it's ideology, it's anything that deviates from the far left or this cadre of leftists that want to perpetrate this type of revolution. And it's here, it's coming. It's not a myth. It's not something that, a lot of college professors are trying to tell their students that this is there's nothing to see here, folks. There's no there with this Marxist coming revolution that they're trying to perpetuate. but it's obvious. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. You don't see, like, there's another story out of California. This teacher that took her American flag out of her classroom and put up a gay pride flag and made the kids stand up and pledge allegiance to the gay pride flag instead of the American flag. I think she's being punished for it or suspended, what have you. But that's another example of how this is being perpetuated upon us. It's kind of like a multi-stage, plan that's being pushed from the top somehow. We don't exactly know who these people are. I don't think they're organized top down. I think it's a function of losing the universities in the 60s and 70s, gradually having these more Marxist leaning people educating our upcoming generations. And then you have this groupthink mentality that pushes into this idea that we're systemically racist, that whites are all part of this, this white cabal, those white supremacist cabal that is just as loosely organized as they are. So again, it's another form of projection, perhaps. But I know for a fact that university professors are teaching future generations this heinous ideology that whites are the root of all evil, that whites are the problem, and that white supremacy is taken hold so pervasively on our economies, on our communities, our culture, and that's essentially where it's coming from. And you see that popping out of these stories, and what happened to Candace. I don't know exactly how. The best way we can start to fight that is by tuning into something like this, hearing what God says we should do about these things, and then making the correction, telling your kids, like, be mindful of who's teaching your kids.
And I had a seminary professor, and I'm not going to name names. I've had a lot of very good seminary professors that I'm very fond of and have been an important part of my education. But I had one that was, more liberal than the majority of them. And we had to read a book in class that right now I don't even want to give the name of the book. It might be something I'll put on Patreon. But it was basically saying that how white people have been complicit in all of the racial injustices in the past, and how much the white church has blood on their hands. And then it took people like George Whitefield and Billy Graham, who no one is perfect, but it almost tried to besmirch their entire character and all the good they've done, because they weren't abolitionist before anything else. And so I pushed back on this book in some of the writings that we shared with the whole class. And then the professor sent an email to the entire class saying how it is a good book and shouldn't be pushed back on. But one thing the professor said in the email, the professor brought up out of nowhere the song. Several students had brought up a song that was important to them growing up. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. And
why did you sing it?
I was afraid how bad it would sound, and I don't want people to tune us out. But
that'd be nice.
Jesus loves. No, sorry.
I'll chime in with you.
Several students said that this taught them to not be racist as young kids. And I would agree with that too. It teaches kids that God loves people of every color. God made all the different races. This professor said that is a bad song because it teaches kids to see the world through the lens of race, and that there's different races, which inevitably sets them up to understand that white people are the main race, and turned it into a racist song. And this is a seminary professor. And I think that just shows how how crazy the ideology has gotten, that song can be turned into a white supremacist song versus a Christian song that speaks against racism.
It sounds like he might be a little confused, like us. Some parts of his body are trying to get out. I think because essentially what he's saying is being colorblind, right? He's kind of advocating for a colorblind society, but that's not what people today are advocating for. They're advocating for an overcorrection. White people need to be punished to make amends for the sins of their past, which is anti-Christian. So this guy's saying that kind of a good thing there, that we should be colorblind, which is what Martin Luther King wanted. But today the discourse today is being driven by the Ibram X. Kendis of the world and the Robin DiAngelos of the world to say that that you should be anti-racist. The only remedy for past racism is for that racism to be perpetrated upon white people. So I think he's kind of half right, half wrong there. But yeah, then to totally muddy up such a beautiful song, but you can kind of see where the book to the recommendation of the book and his end game is all messed up. But I think a colorblind society would be kind of nice. I mean, it's essentially like what I think Jesus now represents, that we're all his children, that we're all beautiful and loved in his eyes. I think Mateo has a good Bible verse to try to delve into the what we're trying to get at here ultimately is to try to bring the Bible back into this discussion, and truly debunk white supremacy ultimately as something that is more biblically driven and a good reason for what we see and what we've experienced throughout the millennia that we've been on this planet, that we're experiencing, and it has its origins in the Bible.
Well, I think this is an interesting passage. It's in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, and it's verses 21 through 28. And I just think it's a really interesting one to bring into this discussion. In the ESV translation, the title heading for this passage is "The Faith of a Canaanite Woman." And remember that the Canaanites originally lived in and possessed the land that became Israel before Israel, through God's help and endorsement, took over that land and killed them, and in many instances pushed them out and made it their own land. Starting at verse 21, "And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, 'Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon.' But he did not answer her a word," that being Jesus. "And his disciples came and begged him, saying, 'Send her away, for she is crying out after us.' Jesus answered, 'I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.' But she came and knelt before him, saying, 'Lord, help me.' And he answered, 'It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.' She said, 'Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table.' Then Jesus answered her, 'O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire.' And her daughter was healed instantly." Now, can you imagine if there was a modern woke liberal sitting at that table when Jesus told this Canaanite woman that he was there for the people of Israel at that time and was not there for her, and even just made the example of the dogs not eating from the master's table? Can you imagine the horror and outrage of a Joy Reid or a Don Lemon at something like that? Now, eventually, Jesus does heal the woman's daughter, because Jesus does love all people. He loved the Canaanites. Jesus reached out to the Samaritans when the rest of the of Israel and the Jews thought of them as less and something to be avoided. So Jesus loved all people, but he had a mission that at the time involved the house of Israel, the same people that took over the land of Canaan and pushed the Canaanites out. So Jesus is siding with the oppressors and initially is not going to do something for this woman, the oppressed, because it's not the mission of the moment. Now, we can get into a huge theological debate about all the depth and nuances of this verse, and there's a lot of it, and we have to be careful about oversimplifying it. But I do think it clearly points out that this idea of just making race such a clear oppressive class, or that if you stand for this and that, you're automatically a racist or a white supremacist. If we're going to paint with that large of a brush, we would have to say that at this moment, Jesus was being a supremacist for the Jews or the Israelites over the oppressed Canaanites. We know that's not true. He ultimately heals the woman, and we see how he treated all people. But you can use the diabolical ideology and argument to try to see race and racism where it's not. Does that make sense? And why I think it's interesting to bring that verse to the discussion?
Yeah, I mean, you could go after God on this topic at that moment, because he chose to delineate between one ethnicity and another. Basically, he was there to convene with Israelites, and he was delineating the fact that she was a Canaanite and not a member of that table at that time. I mean, he refers to her as a dog. He refers to the Israelites as sheep. So, I mean, he's not exactly calling distinction between, he's not suggesting a hierarchy necessarily. He's suggesting a difference. He's suggesting that the Israelites are God's chosen people, and his priority at that time was with them. It later became that his priority was to all of us, and that his hope was that we would all come to him, and we would all be his adopted children. But this just highlights the idea that yes, we're separate, we are different, and there's differences among us, but we can still strive to be equal, and we can still strive to have a beautiful existence.
Also, because it was a woman and a daughter, first there's the racial element of the Israelites and Canaanites that you could try to accuse Jesus of being a racial supremacist because of that. The next thing you can do, which is another line out of the woke playbook, is you can accuse him of toxic masculinity, because there he sits as a man with his 12 male disciples telling a woman and her daughter initially that he's not going to heal them. Maybe he was challenging her. Maybe he wanted to see if she'd push back, and it's showing us that we have to pray hard and push for things. There were good motives. Everything Jesus did have good motives, but you could have accused him of toxic masculinity and then said, oh, he finally just healed her when she was making a scene so that he could keep up his masculine Israelite oppression without it being pushed back. It just shows how false the whole argument is when you really dig into it. And it is a diabolical argument clothed in light. The devil clothes himself in light and disguises himself as an angel of light. It's a diabolical argument clothed in light.
An angel of light, like Don Lemon. Yeah, I mean, gosh, I mean, that's the crux of the issue here. This is why we're using this discussion as a way of debunking the idea of white supremacy as they define it here in this country right now. There is, of course, the garden variety white supremacy of the KKK and the Aryan Brotherhood that exists. In my view, in small numbers, largely in prisons and small towns in Idaho. But how the left identifies white supremacist is not. It's anti-Christian. It's anti-God. And so what's the end game here? That this revolution of sorts, and who's at the, so ultimately who is at the top of this thing? And you got to consider the angel of light. I mean, not Don Lemon. I mean, he's bad in his own way. I mean, his cohort, especially CNN, doing a horrible disservice to the country. But I think it's definitely the enemy. It's definitely Satan that's at the tip of the spear here, or behind the spear, so to speak.
No, it absolutely is. And again, that's another reason we're pushing back on this and
debunking white supremacy.
Yeah, and that other people need to push back on it too. You're going to be called a racist, but if we don't push back, the ideological war is going to be lost. I say to these people, this professor you quoted earlier, and all the left that says that white people need to just, I hate to even say it on here, kill themselves and step out of the way. So if that's the philosophy we're taking, because some white people in the past, which ended up being a move of society as a whole, oppressed black people, that white people just are evil and need to get out of the way. Well, then does that mean that we give Germany to the Jews because of the Holocaust? Do all Germans need to leave Germany, find a home elsewhere, and let the Jews have Germany because the Germans were horribly oppressive to the Jews in the 40s? I don't know if much of the left will like that, because a lot of the left is anti-Semitic. And where do the Germans go? Maybe we send them to the liberal utopia of Afghanistan right now. Yes. Because a country like that's really open to these liberal ideas and ideologies. But so any group that's been horribly oppressed, they just get that country. Well, then let's give Germany to the Jews if that's the way we're going.
And that's a great way to debunk ultimately, is because the end result of that they can't beat that argument, because they're not concerned with those things. They're only concerned with that which brings them power. And by making slavery, white supremacy, the original sin, all those things that they're trying, the 1619 Project, all the Marxist teachings that are coming out of this university system now, they're not really concerned about ultimate justice overall or historical justice. They're concerned about this situation now, rooting out white supremacy as they define it, which is basically our diverse, egalitarian society. I mean, read Steven Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now. That gives you a good synopsis of how well we're doing, as a society. Essentially, so they're seeking the best way they can to make perfect the enemy of the good. And so by identifying these original sins and these shortcomings that everybody naturally has, it's biblical. Everybody sees, everybody exercises these tendencies, but they're highlighting a majority in this country as the oppressors. When I don't think you can. I think you can make the argument we've tried better in the recent years than we've ever had at trying to make things equal and trying to make things as egalitarian as we can. But case in point, the Jordan Peterson talks about the studies out of Scandinavia all the time. They've done the best job of making things as egalitarian as possible, yet that forces natural divergent tendencies of men and women. For instance, men getting more into engineering and STEM type fields, where women typically get into more medical and nursing type fields. There obviously there's outliers, but in Scandinavian cultures, they've regressed to the mean. They've regressed to that natural tendency to make choices based on your gender qualities. And we do that across the board with other intersectional qualities too. So ultimately, the way to beat this is to stop emphasizing intersectionality, stop emphasizing the things that divide us. I mean, we'll do that ourselves naturally. So let's stop emphasizing those things. Let's focus on God. Let's focus on let's find a lamp to light our path, to bring us to Christ, to follow his teachings as best we can. If we can transcribe the Bible and apply it to our lives, we'll be good. And if we can do that, we'll continue to be this anointed nation, this great culture, this great shining city on the hill.
And we've got to understand our Bible like we've talked about before, and understand it deeply, because there are people that are trying to use the Bible, like these seminary professors, to actually push these false ideologies. So you've got to be in your word daily, in the word daily, understand it start to finish, in its complexity and its nuance and its fullness, so you'll know when it's being misused for something false and non-true. Like the verse I read today, we could have a lot of deep discussions about it, and it goes so much deeper than what I've even brought here, but it forces us to at least pause and realize, wait, we've made this whole white supremacy argument. It's too surface level, as we haven't gone deep enough. So even if we have slightly different interpretations of exactly what that verse means, just by acknowledging it, it shows we need a deeper conversation than we're having. So that's why you've got to know your own word well, and be in prayer with God, have that discernment of the Spirit to even be able to combat it with the truth and with God, like you're saying, because there's a lot of people that are creating false Christianities and false Jesuses of their own making. So nowadays, it's not just about being Christian instead of non-Christian. You have to make sure you're following the right Jesus, the real Jesus, the right God, and not the appropriated woke Jesus that wears rainbow Mickey ears and sings Kumbaya all day. You got to be behind the right Jesus, because there's a lot of people propping up a false Jesus today.
We had to create like this fake mascot called Woke Jesus. Like,
oh yeah.
How they have the Fighting Irish, the Notre Dame. They have the Jesus. I forget what they call it, but they call it like the something Jesus in their end zone. But it's like a mascot, right? So
okay,
we could create Woke Jesus, whatever that means. What does he look like? Does he wear scarves? Is he a kind of more of a sensitive type of a guy, or I don't know.
Well, remember, the Bible tells us that when Jesus returns again, that many are going to cry out, "Lord, Lord," and he's going to say, "Depart from me. I never knew you." So that means a lot of people that actually profess Jesus and think he's coming back for them.
The lukewarm shall be spat out.
He's going to say, "I never knew you." So maybe it's all these woke people that try to tell us, if you love Jesus, don't tell me this is wrong and that's wrong. Maybe he's going to say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." Maybe he's going to turn to me and say that I'm doing it wrong. "Depart from me, I never knew you." I'm confident in my interpretation of the Bible, but you got to get in the Bible to know, am I selling you the wrong Jesus, or are they selling you the wrong Jesus? Yeah. Make your choice, but he's going to say to some that cry out, "Lord, Lord, depart from me, I never knew you."
Yeah. I'll be perfectly honest with you. If I'm awake and cognizant on that day of judgment, I'm going to be a little nervous, but I'm pretty confident that I love and trust Jesus and believe that he rose from the dead, and the things that I need to do. But it's a scary notion. I mean, eternity, the favor of God. I think that these Christians that are playing with this idea of woke culture and trying to modify and soften the Bible and soften their approach to the word in their churches, I think they're doing a huge disservice to people. I mean, of course, we know that if you're saved and you put your faith and trust in Jesus, that you'll live forever. But I mean, there's a lot that's going to be said on that day of judgment. And if you want to have as easy a time as possible, you want that well done, good and faithful servant. You don't.
Amen.
You don't want to have Jesus on that day say, Have a seat, son.
We need to talk.
We need to
you
talk.
go to that side over there.
That's good. I mean, the end result may be good, but I don't think you want I don't think you want Jesus kind of going through a few things in your past, so to speak.
And we're all going to have a little bit of that, because none of us are perfect. We've all got plenty to be ashamed of. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Especially this guy right now. I'm just kidding.
Oh no, I've got a prodigal state, and I went pretty deep into the mire in the past for sure. So I'm counting fully on that salvation through Jesus Christ, because there's no getting it on my means.
Me too.
I do want to say though, before the episode draws to a close, I can see we're getting close to that time, but I'm going to be doing a deep dive into this idea of Marxism and how especially groups like BLM and university professors that are preaching this false white supremacy. I'm going to do a deep dive, a 3-part series on Patreon that is going to talk about how they are basically taking the ideals of the Communist Manifesto and twisting them into a racial categorization and using exact Marxist ideology, but with racial undertones for this agenda. And I think it's going to make it very clear. And if you aren't already worried about this and don't already see the threat, I think you definitely will by the end of it. I've also got one on there for those of you that are interested in Marxism and how it's affecting American society today. It's a moment with Mateo, Marx the Militant Atheist, and it talks about how Marxism at its core is anti-religion, anti-God and anti-religion, and that you can't have any type of true Marxism and still have religion in there with it. And if you do still have both, then the Marxism just simply hasn't grown to its fullness yet, in which it will. So if you're interested in any of that, we do a lot of our deeper dives on Patreon, but go on there for that, and you'll be able to find those.
Yeah. That's a great playbook for the enemy, the angel of light, Satan, to use to turn this society against each other. And what better conduit for the ultimate end game, which is the end times. Other than to harness, to go through America first. We are the kind of, you can make a strong argument. We are the light of this world, other than God himself. I mean, we are the bright spot on this planet that has been able to direct, to affect discourse, to affect positivity between nations, relative peace throughout the years. And for Satan to grab control of this country and to attack God's people this way, it just makes sense. I mean, it's just a very effective strategy, and it's been it's Satan because it's been such a long game. There's no way one individual human being could do this the way Satan has. I mean, think about it. Since the 60s and 70s, to grab control of the universities, to start to teach these growing generations Marxist ideology, intersectionality. We see it now trying to vilify white supremacy as if it is a pervasive and dangerous thing, and to utilize all these original sins that facilitate this end game. It has to be a satanic. There has to be a satanic source to it. And I think that's the clear etiology, the clear beginnings of this. If you ask me, I mean, I think
absolutely. And if Satan is trying to destroy America, which he certainly is, if you just look at population statistics, white people are 60+% of the country. Black people are like 13%.
12, 13.
12, 13, and Hispanics around maybe 20-something, high teens. But white people are still the vast majority of this country and are a majority. So if you're trying to destroy the country, you go for the whole thing, but you definitely go for that majority. So you try to make that majority evil first, just to take care of that majority. And then if his play works and he gets that out of the way, well, then he immediately turns on the minorities and begins to destroy them. That's when the devil, could easily bring in your Islamic radicals to just come in and show you what they think of the minorities in this country. So it's you've got to look at it through that lens, and you can't forget the population statistics that it's 60% and 13%, and that comes into play in this.
Yeah. Yeah. And then even within that, I mean, there's so many, like consider the black church, lots of God-fearing, really good Christian men and women. And they're not they don't want to fall for this stuff. The Latino community, or if you believe Joe Biden, the Latinx community, Latinx community. So there's so many good Christians in those ranks as well. So we have such of good-minded, good Christ followers. There's so many of us that don't want to see this to continue to sully the great work that we've tried to do through the years. And I mean, this is such a great country, and such a beautiful God, such a beautiful faith that we have. And we just want to see that to continue and get better. And we hope to continue to be able to do that through 3F, through what we do here. We hope that you got something out of this. Please leave some comments if you can. Please let us know what you thought of our arguments and where we need to improve them, or what you think of, any concerns or criticisms you may have. So thanks so much for listening. Do you have anything else to add, Mateo, before we get going for the day?
Just that we love you all, red and yellow, black and white. We are precious in His sight.
Jesus loves the little children
of the world.
Amen.
For exclusive content and bonus footage, please subscribe to our Patreon page at patreon.com/3fcommunity. That's patreon.com/3fcommunity. We'd love to have you join the family.